Better deal with it now than later.
So should we try to sign up for sponsorships? You know, this panel is brought to you by Diet Pepsi.
Well, I mean, I'm not against it.
Logo in the front. That does remind me. I was doing the Riff Ponies. Not the Riff Ponies. The Riff Ponies streams where we were watching Madame Web, and one of the things we kept pointing out is the Pepsi logo and all the cans they're holding is always facing the camera. And it's not uncommon, it's just that you could clearly tell that they changed the angle between camera angles.
It's like when Mark Wahlberg drank that beer in Transformers.
Or that one scene with Pepsi in World War Z.
Okay.
He drank some Pepsi in the middle of the zombie apocalypse.
And I think that was actually a part of a plot point, like the Pepsi cans could be used to distract the zombies.
With the power of Pepsi.
Cartoons back then were wild with what they did.
Oh, this is all live action. Although, live action with a lot of CG.
So basically a cartoon.
Yeah. It's when people say, oh, the live action Lion King. You mean the CG that just looks more boring?
No, well, it's live action because of that one opening shot. The funniest part is that they were trying to replicate that one opening that's iconic. The sun is not in the center of the frame anymore. Like, they like to take all the iconography, but they couldn't get the sun at the right place. You could just push the camera a bit.
Well, they messed up. What a bunch of dummies. So bad now. Disney, why?
I saw the trailer for the live-action Lion King. I'm like, oh my god, they're regurgitating a story again.
Well,
I know Disney is in a flop, but they need to stop using AI for stuff.
alright. Well, shall we start things rolling?
Oh yeah, go ahead, introduce yourself.
Alright, hello everyone! HarmonyCon 2025, how are you doing?
Good.
Excellent, glad to hear it. So we're exchanging tales of Disney disappointments, which is becoming a frightening long list. But we're not disappointed in getting the chance to talk with you. I am Silver Quill, the annoying hippogriff of the fandom. And here with me is Minty Root, a professional animator and one of the best animators in the fandom.
Yeah.
I speak true.
I've been working in the animation industry since right after COVID. I've had mostly an experience with live action with Aquaman, Maleficent, Mistress of Evil, and a couple of other smaller projects. And I got to actually see how the field changed since the pandemic. The world of animation is crazy in terms of how they pull things off. When you find out how many things they cheat on, it's pretty crazy. We're going to be talking about G5, not just a new generation, but we're also going to be covering Maker Mark, Tell Your Tale, and the games.
So we've got a lot to spirit through. Let us see what we got. First, but we're going to start with the highest point, the movie. The brand new start, a Netflix special, and I would actually argue the best My Little Pony movie we've had to date. I feel like we've gotten progressively better with each one, so maybe we'll get that true theater release again in the future. But there's a lot going on in this, and there was a lot of hard work put into it. What we know about this place? Well, one, it's very European. Yes, that's what I've learned. I can't place all the countries in Europe, so I'll just keep it vague. Case in point, the generation shot breakdown at the end, where the three Phillies, I believe, or a Colt, are talking, quoting Pip's song, and these characters, starting on the left, are Maya, X-Gen, and Arnold. Why? Because they were done in Maya, X-Gen, and Arnold.
Keep this in mind, this will be relevant later.
But Minty, for those of us who are barely getting footing in Adobe Premiere Pro and the like, what are Maya, X-Gen, and Arnold?
So Maya is considered the industry standards in terms of 3D software. It's not the best in my opinion because I've used it a lot. Actually, let's switch. I can show very quickly what Maya looks like. Right. I guess the projector doesn't like switching between screens. This is what Maya looks like. It's the funny thing is I was looking at some demonstrations of how it looked like back in the 2000 because the software started in 1999. It was an extension of Alias Power Animator. Well, it's the extension. They rebuilt a lot of it, but the whole idea was one of the very first 3D animation software for consumer-grade computer hardware. Before that, they actually needed some dedicated hardware like SGI workstations or the Pixar image computer. And the whole idea with Maya is that it was supposed to be a series of tools for animators, mostly for artists, that could pull off a lot of things on consumer-grade hardware. The interface hasn't changed, and that's the most baffling part. I was looking at edit, they changed the colors and some of the icons. The layout has been the same since. This is the industry standard. There's a lot of productions that use it. Incredible stuff. When you see a production that uses Blender, this is the exception, not the norm. So, XGen in comparison is the hair extension for Maya. And Arnold is also associated with Maya now. It used to be its own standalone software. It's a 3D renderer. It uses stochastic path tracing. I'll be explaining it later.
Alrighty, so we'll cover more of those as we go, but here's the thing. Ponies, up until the new generation, they've mostly been confined to the second dimension, with the occasional hello Pinkie Pie to haunt my nightmares. See, there she is.
Oh, yeah.
I mean,
I'm clean.
we have
boss.
real life, Y life, and 3D life. Shattering.
And you're going to notice all of them look off-putting for different reasons, and there's a couple of things. Next slide.
Right here. I said here.
So this is, you look at Derpy in this one and you think like, this is a 3D view of a 2D rig, and you're thinking like, this should be pretty straightforward to translate into it. As it turns out, one of the main problems is the eyes. If you look at the front view, the eyes are very forward facing. And then if you look at the profile view, the eyes are on the side. And if you look at the block sheet slide, you notice right away one of the problems that they have. The eyes are going to be either too spread apart or too much in front. And then you can look how they handle it in the Game of Game. You're going to notice with the Game of Game, it's the opposite way. And I don't know if it's intentional or if it's just me seeing patterns, but whenever you see a pony doing a dance, the pony usually does the dance facing on the profile, and I think it's just because they realize that they're more appealing from that angle. Pretty much all the mini games actually use it. In terms of modeling, if you look at how they handled it for new generation, the eyes are actually facing forward, which means that those ponies are predators. And if you look back at the previous slide again, you're going to notice also this model is done with triangles. This is not how they actually handle it for the animation for the movies. With animation pipelines for movie productions, they actually use quads. Those are actually models that they took from the video games. Video game engines actually use triangles because it's easier to process and to calculate. And also one of the reasons that with quads, I'll explain later, but the whole idea is that they use a subdivision model. You never see polygons because if they have to get closer, they'll subdivide those quads into you take a grid, think of it as a rectangle that you cut into 4 smaller rectangles, and then you smooth that out. And that's the approach they use. That's why they're modeled that way. And you're going to also notice that those polygons have to follow the way that they're going to bend. For all the joints, go back 2 slides after.
2 slides after.
Yep.
Staring into your soul.
We're going to talk about rigging. If you look at the way the polygons are going in terms of direction of the face, it informs the way that you're going to approach the rigging. Because the whole idea is that when you move those polygons, they're going to be controlled by different aspects, different deformers. I guess I can show really quickly what I mean if I switch back.
This program brought to you by Dell. Dell, we keep interrupting the slideshow.
So, this is not from the movie. This is one of the rigs that they exported from the game. But the whole idea is that you have a controller and you want everything to follow that controller. And one of the things you notice, for example, this is inverse schematics, and you look at the way the polygons are meant to bend. So let's disable X-ray. There we go. And then you see how those polygons are meant to bend, and you can also see some of the limitations. And one of the problems with how they stretch is due to the way that they need to plan those polygons ahead of time. With 2D, if you want to have a hoof that's curved in a way, you just draw it that way. In 3D, you have to plan it. So for example, the mount, I need to go out. I have to go through, I don't remember. There we go. So in this case, for example, you have those controls or those values, and you can see how those polygons are stretched out as the mount goes. And you can also see if I extend the range, for example, if you have a pony that's supposed to be screaming, what happens if you go too far? And then you see the interior of the mount bag. Whenever you have a pony screaming, you have to have something inside the mount. And you have to worry about making sure that the inside of the mount doesn't go outside or collides with the neck. So let's go back.
Reminds me of a whale shark, to be honest.
You're going to notice that also affects the way that they animate the characters.
Come on down. There we go. Just about there.
And usually it goes instantly. That one.
There we go.
But you're going to notice the extent that they have for the mounts. Because it's defined by the topology. If you had to actually have something that's more extreme, you might have to actually sculpt a whole different mount entirely, morph between it. In 2D, you just draw it. And you can also see one of the limitations of style. The teeth are individually cobbled. Whenever you'd actually see individual teeth for ponies in 2D, that would be for emphasis. But they need to keep the same level of detail because of the artistic approach that they have. So a lot of a lot of the facial expressions that they have are actually defined by those limitations. And it's also the other way around. The style that they have, if you go with the second example.
Before we do it, I just want to note that it looks like AJ is losing her voice. She's a little hoarse.
Okay.
Thank you.
So that was that was my example. If Blender didn't work while I was demonstrating it, but the whole idea is that you see the limitations if you try to have a character that smiles too much. So there are a lot more constraints in the approach that they have, and if you go to the next one, and you can really see they have very strong posing. They actually know how to make it look appealing to the camera. They do an incredible job at it, but they don't really get the extreme that they have, and that's not even the most extreme GIF I have of Pinkie Pie, just making crazy contortions. The best example I can usually give is whenever she's about to hug, all her group of friends, her arms stretch, and they stretch like over a meter long. You never see that in a new generation because they're, as far as I can tell, they never actually stretch the legs. You might have some animated series where they would actually have legs that stretch because the style that goes for that. But for that one, they never stretch the legs. Yeah.
Well, I have seen some. I can think of some scenes where Izzy Lumbo's body seems to stretch to some extent when, like, she's trying to sit down.
But
Or it seems that way.
But not to the extent of Pinkie Pie.
Well, no, not like Pinkie Pie.
Yeah.
She defies physics.
She really does.
And it's quite funny because with inverse kinematics, the whole idea is that you have a control, and the idea is that you pull and it completes the motion with because you have a target for the arm. But you have a stretch control, so if you put the control for the arm too far, and it's gonna stop at some point. But you can override that control and actually force it to stretch. And sometimes they might actually use that if you have a character who's reaching for something in the camera and you want to have some forced perspective. And then you look at the view from outside the camera and the arm is like a meter long. It's so crazy.
Mr. Fantastic finds representation everywhere. But then we also have the idea of generating speed.
Yeah. With 2D animation, they love using smear frames because they look funny and they also give a good sense of what kind of movement you get in the middle. With 2D, it's pretty good because you can actually draw the shape and you can also have that kind of motion blur trail. But in 3D, what they ended up using as an approach, they just went with the default motion blur that's generated by Arnold. And it basically just interpolates between the previous and the next frame to just smooth out the image. And then you can really see that it just looks like a blur because it's going fast. There's no exaggeration that you have like in 2D. It's not a limitation of 3D because you can actually do that in 3D. There's a couple of examples.
Pick your nightmare, folks.
It's definitely more of a challenge to do it in 3D because 3D rigs are very constrained. If you want to have more eyes, for example, for a character, you might need to import an entire full rig of the character again, just get the eyes, pull them away, and parent them just for that one frame. Unless the rig has been specifically made for that. Sometimes you might have a rig with arms, but yeah, you have extra arms just for that motion smear. You need to import different weapons for that and paint over those lines. And it really looks much more different in terms of aesthetic appeal to go with that kind of stylist approach. It looks incredible, but it's also more expensive. And if I recall correctly, in the generation it costs like $6 million to make, which is nothing for 3D animated movies.
Next frame.
Let's talk about Arnold. Arnold is a stochastic path tracer. Think of it like shooting rays towards a surface, seeing what it bounces on, and if it bounces on that surface, you will then shoot a ray towards one of the directions it would bounce towards until you hit the light or the limit. And one of the problems is that it starts very grainy and then it gets smooth. I will actually show how it actually looks like with, it's called an IPR. So,
We'll have our customary Dell pause.
So this is the IPR, and the whole idea is that you have your view that as you can see it progresses because the whole actually let me why is mine there we go, let's zoom in. And you can see that the view progresses by shooting rays until it converges to the image, and it starts very grainy at first. And let's see. Here. For example, if you want to change the roughness, you have the whole idea works on specular roughness model. So you have the diffuse part, which is the color of the surface, and then you have the specular color, which is usually white for dielectrics. So for example, if you change the roughness to 0 and then I set that to black, you can see pure reflection, and then you increase the roughness, it starts to be more rough. For example, like marble. And then you go to something fully rough and it just looks like something like clay. For example, if I go back and I change the color of this to, let's go with something gold. So it doesn't look like gold, but at the moment you increase the metalness, you actually change the factor, because the whole idea with metalness is that the color of the reflection, the color of the specular reflection part is, it's going to be white if it's a dielectric, but at the moment it's actually conducting electricity. The light it's going to reflect is going to be tinted. So for example, if I go with something gold like that, you're going to notice that even if actually, we'll force Izzy to be blue. Forgot to import textures for that one, but let's force Izzy to be blue. And you notice that the reflection is not really that much blue, it's more of a gray. It looks blue in comparison, but it's really affected by that texture, by that material. And one of the cool things is that the lighting model is actually accurate. So if I force it to be very, very bright, and then I set back metalness, I hate doing it live, but this will be worth it. For example, if you look at the contact shadows between the parts of the main, it's actually physically accurate. It's not done. One of the approaches that they have for ambient occlusion is that they just shoot rays at some corners, and if it hits something else, it just darkens, which doesn't look too far from the real deal, but it has some technical issues. But if I increase the brightness of that light source again, you can see how the light bounces between surfaces, so you get really to see the bounce on the ground that bounces back on the character. And all of this is handled by the renderer just by the way that the stochastic batch tracing is handled. This is helping a lot, but one of the disadvantages is that you see the rendering time it takes just to get one very, very simple model. You might take scenes that take 5 minutes per frame, 30 minutes per frame, just to get the whole lighting model working. We'll talk about it a bit later. So let's switch back to you.
Now, just to clarify, these numbers in the upper left corner of each image, 16, 64, and 256, I believe?
Those are sample counts.
Sample counts.
Because the whole idea is that you want as many samples as possible to get the image that looks as sharp as possible. You have some techniques to smooth it out using machine learning. It's not generative AI, it's basically just smoothing out by looking at what the scene is looking like and just smoothing it out over. But one of the problems is that you still have to get lots of samples to get a good image. And you can really see how it affects reflection, refraction, the bounce, for example, the red bounce on all the objects. And fun fact, Arnold, guess which Arnold it's named after?
Arnold Schwarzenegger?
Yeah. I like it's the first one. And it basically said because it is brute force batch tracing, it's very, very good for very big scenes. So they thought Arnold is strong, so let's name it Arnold.
Doesn't matter though, if I see him in the street, I'll say, "Hey, Arnold."
Looks like a hammer from Iron Lung.
Alrighty.
So you can see a bit how it affects the style at the approach. You can see the hair fuzz that's actually accurate. Every hair strand is actually casting shadows on other ones by the approach. You get subsurface scattering, especially with the ears. It actually goes through the surface and actually calculates the way that it would bounce. You get refraction from glass, you get bounce lighting between the characters, you get contact shadows, especially in the middle for the cardboard. It's not actually just textured to be dark. Some TV shows might actually just texture the cover, but it's actually a model of the interior and the contact shadows just work. It's actually pretty impressive, and you can really see how it actually works together. But it might be an accurate render in terms of physics, but it has its own issues. So next frame, you can see, for example, you see on Onyx the lighting that's cast on her. The lighting on her is brighter than the light from the window. It's implied to be from the window, and it's really made for emphasis. It's made to drive your attention on Onyx and not the view behind. And all of it comes down to the lighting artist that actually has to put the light source behind to actually get that nice crisp green light. I will be talking about it a bit later too. It's pretty crazy. And we also have the color scripts. I think that's the next slide, right?
There.
Yeah, there we go. And one of the things is that when you do a color script is that you take an artist, you have a scene with no lighting, and you ask the artist, can you paint over the lighting that's intended? And you're going to give that to the lighting artist to define the direction. So you know exactly what kind of mood you're looking for, what kind of emphasis. For example, if you want more lighting on one of the characters to draw more emphasis, but do you want to make it more natural, you have that kind of color script. It also affects the color of the lights, because you don't want to just go with pure white for the lights. For example, if you want something that's more warm, more blue, sometimes you might go with completely green lighting. and all of it just comes down to the color script artist. Next one. Now let's talk about XGen. So the hair itself is simulated. It's not that every single strand is simulated because it would be too much, but the whole idea is that it has some parent strands that follow with physics simulations, and then you have the children strands that actually follow those parents. So it's not perfect, it's going to be interpolated, but you actually feel like you're following some motion, and you can, I think we have right next to it some GIFs, but they move. You really feel like the bounce, it actually follows the head movement, and it's really nice because it actually makes it feel a lot more stiff. You really feel like it's made, you really feel like there's a pony that's made out of things. Like the hair really feels like real hair. It moves with its own movement. It's more physically accurate, but you might have some stylization. You might have to ask the artist, like, can you put some wind to make it feel more? Maybe you want some angelic shot with lots of really nice wind in the hair that doesn't get in the face, and you really feel like the detail it gives is really, really cool. And since every single strand is rendered with this proper physical accuracy, it actually feels like you're looking at hair that has that physicality.
Though if you watch it on a loop long enough, it starts to feel like Five Nights at Freddy's.
That does. I'm gonna lose my mind.
Well, then let's hurry to the next slide quickly.
So, characters are rigged. You remember when I had the controller that I pulled to change how the hoof would be handled? This also applies for props. So for example, if you look at the windmill that she has on top of her head, that's supposed to be a horn, that has to be rigged accordingly by a rigging artist. Like it needs to rotate along. You're also going to have environment assets. For example, you might have the frame itself be a static piece that's handled by a whole different department. It's not made to be animated, so it just stays there. Same thing with those lamps with the light bulbs, which is pretty funny because those light bulbs don't actually emit any light. They're bright, but don't actually emit light on the characters. It's done by prop artists that to populate the scene. They don't really have to worry about anything. For example, the paint was sculpted to be in the shape of the paint instead of actually making simulation or making anything that has that physical aspect. You're also going to have props that are on characters. Sometimes what they're going to do is that they're going to parent the prop, for example, on the head, and if it's just something that's going to be seen once. But if it's a piece of clothing that's always going to be on the character, is going to be part of the rig for the character. Sometimes I remember it was an example of this one. It was from a game in Final Fantasy VII Remake. One of the characters is always seen smoking a cigar, so the cigar is always part of his rig, just because it's easier to make it part of it. And then you can parent it. For example, if it's supposed to be in his hand, you control it and just make sure it's always stuck in the hand and never goes away. And the parenting really helps to make sure that that it follows the animation. It makes sure that the animator doesn't have to constantly animate it on top of it. If, for example, you have a prop that the character is holding, you're going to parent it to the hand, and then if you have to give it to someone else, you're going to have to change shift the weight between the two and making sure that it looks smooth. I remember there was a scene I was working on where it was a character handing a prop to another one, but the animator forgot basically either changed the way that the animation was done for the other part, so the prop just jumped from one to the other just because the parenting was done wrong, and I had to actually fix it. So it's a lot of the things that you don't think of, because physically, while I grab this is something that's natural. It's in my hand right now just because it's holding it. But for the world of animation, if it's not parented, the hand would just keep moving and the prop would just stay there, static. So it's a lot of things you have to consider. And this will also be relevant later. Yeah.
So let's say like he's smoking a cigar and he reaches up and grabs it and puts it in his hand. In the animation, is it rigged to his mouth? Is it parented to his mouth? And then when he grabs it, it needs to change to be parented towards his hand?
Yeah, you have controllers that actually allow for it. If it's part of the rig, you might have a controller that just says like what is it supposed to be connected with, and you just switch between the two with the key. If it's not part of a rig, what you have is parent controllers with a weight constraint. It's from 1 to 0 to 1. If it's at 0, it will not follow at all. If it's at 1, it will follow. And sometimes you might go between the two if you just want it to kind of follow. For example, if you have a scene where you have someone who's pulled by a rope and it's just supposed to be kind of in the middle of the rope, you can actually put it like 0.2 is going to be kind of in the way. And it actually works pretty well. Let's talk about some of the other things. For example, all the glitter on Sugar Moonlight. The glitter is actually 2 separate departments that have to work together. So the glitter of the hair is actually done by little small pieces that reflect the light that's actually parented on the hair itself. And the glitter of her makeup actually has to be done by the surfacing department that's actually textured on. And surfacing department, we usually think about the albedo, but you're gonna also have to paint different aspects of the shading. For example, you might have to paint what part is going to be specular, what part is not going to be specular, what part is going to have to use metalness. You might have to paint the alpha if there's transparency, and they're all going to be on separate texture maps. And the whole idea with that is that it helps the renderer actually define what part. I remember I had an argument with that with someone who was trying to manually paint it for 2 props for 2 separate models. Because he was actually painting a reflection of the texture. So sometimes you might have, for example, a mirror. You can just define the mirror reflection as purely reflective. But for example, if you have a model that has to be going from very reflective to non-reflective as a gradient, you would need the texture. The best example I can think of is wet floor. So you'd see wet spots on the asphalt, and you actually see the gradient from fully reflective to slightly reflective. And that nice gradient is actually done by that texture. In this case, for example, the texture, the reason why it's part of makeup like that is that since it's tied to the geometry, for example, if the character blinks, it needs to stretch along with the eyes. And it's quite a challenge if we want to make sure that the eyes stretch and the makeup actually follows properly and doesn't look like a weird smudge. So you need to have very good surfacing artists to make sure that the texture is actually done properly. So
I think our next slide is also talking about glitter, both glitter and textures and transparency.
And you can also see, when I was talking earlier about lighting, you can really see the lighting emphasis. Like you have 2 characters that actually have their own ring lights that don't really come from anything. They kind of try to make it feel like it's coming from a natural source. But you also see a fill light that's added just to put a bit more punch from the background. And you can really see, you can also see the props with the balloons. For that one, they actually had to simulate the balloons with a physical simulation. They basically had to, and then the rope actually follows. It's basically a cloth simulation. And the whole idea is that you simulate the parameters and you add some wind, and you also have to have the character animation, which is pretty funny because animators they don't work with the simulation, they work before it. So they had to make it a scene where the character is pulled away from the balloons without the balloons. And then you have the effects artist basically adding in the balloons and fit in a way that makes it feel like you're actually the one pulling. If you have a scene, for example, with a boat that's standing on water, the boat is animated first, and then they have to make sure that the water follows, which is, it feels backwards when you think about it, like the boat should follow the water, but in this case, it's always the opposite. Next one. Compositing. So the idea is that you're going to layer your characters and you're going to have some special elements. Think of it like Photoshop for video. So for example, the slide on the slide on the projector was actually done in comp. That's why you don't actually see any of the light of the projector actually going easy. And I think this was stylized because they realized that if you put the image of the projector on top of her, it would be distracting. You can also see the shadow that she's projecting, which is pretty funny because if you actually pay attention, you're going to notice that the shadow that's cast from her is actually darker than the darkest part of the slide. And I think part of it was that they wanted some contrast, but I think they might have made an actual mistake using their own values, because you can even see when she keeps moving that the shadow doesn't actually follow. There's one framework that she jumps, all because it's done by compositing and not part of the render. In theory, they could actually have done that as a projector by actually putting a spotlight and actually adding the slide as part of the whole. But it's more trouble, and lighting artists would probably hate you if you had to re-render because the slide had to be changed. Part of the reason why they really like doing it in Com is that changes in the last minute are much easier to do, so it really helps. Next slide. Okay, so let's adapt for television. Like, you're gonna have a movie that's 90 minutes long, full of beautiful animation. What if you have to stretch it to 24 episodes of 22 minutes? It's I think the next slide actually gives a math.
Yep, get 12 hours of television with the same resources as a 90-minute movie.
So you're going to make a lot of concessions, and a lot of people, when they saw Make Your Mark, they felt like that's a downgrade, and that's actually true. Part of it is just that they had to make compromises to make it work. So first compromise, the limited lights. Remember earlier when I was talking about the idea that Arnold is actually stochastic path tracing. So you have bouncing lights, you have contact shadows, you have lots of other things. Here you have glowing lights that don't actually glow on any of the characters. They're just there to pretend to be bright. You actually have reflections. Hard to see on the projector, but the rail is made of metal that reflects. So there's still specular reflection, but there's no diffuse reflection. And part of it is that specular reflections are harder to actually fake. They can actually get artists to actually make a fake kind of diffuse light, something that feels like proper lighting for the scene. But if you go with specular reflections, faking it with cube maps, for example, would just not look very good for that kind of Netflix project. And it's also cheaper to render with just one passive specular reflection than trying to render all of the diffuse bound light. You would go from something that might take 20 minutes per frame to maybe less than a minute. But you also have other concessions, because since the lighting is not able to bounce on surfaces to actually get that nice interior light, for example, you're going to have to deal with, next slide, the limited light. You're going to notice that in Make Your Mark, the characters are always lit by 3 lights. You get, actually, I have that in my head. So you get the nice rim lights that's behind the character, and the whole idea is that, there. So you have the nice rim light that's behind the character, and it really helps separate the character. And then you're going to have the key light. The whole idea with the key light, you put it at an angle like this, and it really helps to define the shape. And then you have a fill. Yep,
I'm helping.
You're helping. Actually, let's do that. So rim light, key light, and then the fill light, which is pretty much all the ambient light that you have. The fill light that you actually have with the fill light that you actually have for that is not physically accurate. It's basically just one giant light source that's just bouncing from everywhere around. They actually use that for a lot of things. Think of it like a light that's a sphere that's pointing inwards. And sometimes what they would have is the texture on it, and they call them HDR high dynamic range images. They really like taking photos of that for whenever they have skylights, where they basically take a sphere texture of everything around. For example, nice clouds, nice sun, sky. And you basically project that image of that sky on the model, and then you get the accurate lighting for that model. They mostly just use that for if you have, for example, you have to have a movie where you have a scene with special effects, and you need to match the lighting for the special effects with the lighting with everything else. Since you have a texture the proper lighting around, you just match that with that texture. So you have that limitation. You're also going to notice. I think it's later slide. Since all the characters are lit by 3-point lighting, anytime there's a lamp, the lamp is pretty much useless. You see 3 separate lights that just glow, but they don't really glow on any of the characters. There is a ring light that's meant to separate them from everything else, but the only shadows they're casting is actually from the ceiling, even though there's no real light source from the ceiling. And part of it is just much easier to actually calculate that and to have a recipe that just looks good for everything, because you're going to cut back and forth between cameras, and sometimes the lighting might just look weird from one angle. So just having one recipe they can reuse for everything else on that kind of pipeline is just much easier. Next one. The hair. Oh, actually you wanted to...
I'm noticing that the lighting in the background, while it is good at bringing them out more and whatnot, but it's also giving them an unnatural silhouette.
Yeah.
It's just like with SpongeBob or Fairly Odd Parents, they have an outline, and it just doesn't seem as natural.
And okay, so a little bit. Oh, actually, you were gonna go. Okay, so second compromise, no hair simulation. So the hair just follows a couple of bones. So if you look at all the hair strands in the new generation, the hair strands actually follow their own path as they bounce around. And if you look at the one from Maker Mark, it's literally just driven by a single thing. It's like, think of if the hair was a mop that you grabbed from one end and you just wiggled around, and that's it. There's no more stuff. Yeah.
And plus, mane is cut shorter.
Yep.
Yeah, I just now noticed. Well, no, hold on.
It's
Yeah,
We're looking at it from a different angle though, because her hair on her right side is longer, and her left side looks a little shorter.
Her mane is shorter in Maker Mark.
A little bit, but also remember that when we get to tell your tale.
Yeah. It's still long.
And yeah, one of the things with that too is that since it's the whole thing is animated by the animators instead of being simulated. So if they want to have any wind, they actually have to wiggle it around them, and it doesn't feel as dynamic. So whenever you want to have hair that just feels crazy, you're very limited. Matte paintings, whenever you see Maritime Bay, it's always the same matte painting. For example, this case, and then this case, same angle. And one of the problems is that what if they want to have a shot at night? They don't really have a matte painting of it at night. They could just take the old matte painting, because this is not something they made for Maker Mark. This is actually reused from. This is actually reused from this shot. So whenever they actually look at Maritime Bay, it's just a flat picture. They could, in theory, just make some kind of day for night out of it and paint over some light, but it would probably not look the best. And it feels a bit flat whenever you look at an establishing shot, and you really feel like this is always a matte painting, always seen from the same angle. It feels a bit cheap, and one of the good examples I can think of is this one. Whenever you see Opaline's castle, it's always a matte painting, except when it got destroyed. Spoilers. They just made that model of a tree that they had with a bridge, and you can see that the bridge is not even the same one. They just had a bridge model that they made for that. And you can't really feel, because whenever they cut to that, they always cut from to that to the same angle, same time of the day. And there's some exceptions whenever they have shots looking from out the window. So they have a very, very tiny set for the outside of the window that we could cut to. Vector motion blur. So whenever they had motion blur in the new generation, it was actually done by interpolating within the renderer. So you didn't have to worry about the thing in this case, but the motion blur is done by just smudging across the vector. Think of a vector by a pixel that tells the the direction and speed of that pixel. And what you take with that, you basically tell the in comp, you tell like blur it by that amount, that direction. So it blurs it across the direction it's supposed to look like motion blur. But if it's not separated properly, you can actually feel like the motion blur is actually pasted on the characters. It looks like their soul has been sucked. Next one. Lots of compositing errors. If you have 12 hours of TV to do within a year, you don't have the time to check every single comp for missing frames. And they forgot the layer. They forgot the layer for the telephone because the object is rendered separately. And all it is that you need to render it separately because, for example, if you want to change the colors of just one prop, you're going to need that. Because if you use an ID map, but for some reason they thought not going with that. You can see, for example, if you look at the depth of field for the sunny shot, the one on the left, the depth of field is messed up. There's some artifacts, it's not properly done. And you can also see the polygons of the model because they didn't have the time to re-render with the proper subdivision level. Remember earlier when I was talking about the cube map, the idea that you split your cubes and then you smooth it to get a smoother surface? It's basically that. You basically want to subdivide and then smooth to get smoother models. It's one of the advantages that you have with 3D animation for movies and TV shows. Since you can do that within the render, you can actually have avoid having visible polygon. But in this case, they forgot to, so it's not perfect. Yeah.
And for this example,
the eyes are clipping all the time. So funny story, while MakerMark was airing, I was working Scoob Holiday Hunt, and they had big eyes as well. And one of the things I was actually paid to do was fix all the clipping they would have whenever it would blink, just because they would have eyebrows and very big eyes, and the eyelashes would just clip all the time with the eyebrows. And I found it hilarious, just the idea that the eyes would be the one thing I would have to worry about the clipping the most. With MakerMark, you just don't have the budget to fix it per shot, so whenever you blink, sometimes you get it. Sometimes it collides with the fur. Talking about the fur, we're gonna talk about it later.
but first we're gonna have a nightmare.
So, this is an extreme version. This is an extreme version of exfoliating. And the whole idea is that the fur, it's tied to the geometry of the model. It follows along, but it's not generated by the model at runtime. So you need to have a recipe to generate the cache for the fur. And the problem is that sometimes the cache doesn't get synced up. So as far as I can tell, they had zip that was a bit too close, and they wanted to clear up the silhouette to actually properly see their faces. So they just moved it around, exported the model for render, but they forgot to actually update the cache. And then they sent the render. Netflix took it and forgot to check before posting it. They actually fixed it for the episode afterwards, but it was pretty embarrassing. I remember there was a story about a couple of VFX artists saying like, my work is not even the final work. They basically released an older version that they published. And I did find it pretty funny to think that, you want the final version to be released, but to just release final. The industry don't really have to worry too much about de-versioning because they have their own versioning system. So you really have the versioning with the date when it was released, the number version. You don't really have the thing yet we had. When we were at school and we had like final v2 the duck x before giving it to the teacher, and you panic because you think like, did I actually give the proper version? We actually have to worry about making sure this doesn't not happen for industry work. So yeah.
Well, so I mean, when I'm watching special, I did catch an animation error that stood out to me. I think it was after Zip and Pip performed at their Royal Wish-a-Time thing, and I think at one brief scene, I think Pip had 2 tiaras on top of each other.
Yeah, that could have happened. I would need to actually look at it in person, but
It might also be Pip's ego. I mean,
yeah, we need to look at it in person to actually know exactly. It could be a rendering issue. Sometimes it would have a previous frame added on top. It could be 2 different props because they need to have the crown. Then they tell, well, you know, we don't need the crown anymore. And then we were told, oh, no, bring back the crown. But you already got rid of crown, so you need to import a new crown, parent it. And this is the biosync that you have to work with. It's not that biosync or user render. They have a cache for the animation, so they're probably going to have the first tiara, model of Pip, then the second one, and they forgot to clear out the pipe.
Yeah, that frame that you just showed, I did not notice it when I watched.
That was not in the version they released. It was just for the promo stills. So you can also see limits that they have setting up crowds, since crowds are very expensive to render, and they take a lot of time because sometimes they're going to have crowd characters that clip into other things. So whenever they have crowd shots, they have maybe 10 people.
but I've always considered this one of the saddest sights in Make Your Mark. We're introduced to main melody, and jazz and Rocky. We're about to have a musical, but they can only have the time and budget for the core cast. If say Friendship is Magic were tackling this, there'd be a few ponies in the background just listening and jamming along. As it is, it looks like a very lonely shot in composition. And no, Jazz's ears were not a mistake. The producers actually decided to axe them, but thankfully not literally.
That's pretty cool.
Very.
And it's also pretty funny, if you zoom in on that crowd shot, you're going to notice a lot of reused characters. I think I found like 4 different Sprouts, and the same hat has been reused like maybe 6 times with 2 different characters. One of the things is that it's a crowd shot that appears very shortly, like you don't really notice it because you don't pay attention for long enough to match it, and it's kind of the goal. They could have made something more dynamic, but it's not worth it for like 3 seconds.
That's one of the few things I've actually noticed in the early seasons of MLPG4 is when they were making a crowd, they would actually repeat some of the characters in the background.
Yeah.
I don't know how many times I saw Dr. Who's like twice in like one shot.
Yeah, it was very prominent in the very first episode too.
Very, very prominent.
It probably doesn't help that Flash, it's a 32-bit software, or at least it used to be. And you had a limitation of file size, so you're gonna have too many assets before Flash would just lose its mind and crash. So they probably just reuse the same novels just to make sure that it wouldn't crash, because the head scene would be too heavy and probably just assumed people wouldn't care. And they were wrong. Now we have lots of fan theories about the double gangers.
No,
So next one.
Yes, we're finally getting to the dragons.
Those were
So-
not dragons suffering.
I'm not entirely sure how they approached it, but they pretty much reused the body geo for the ponies for the dragons, and then changed it. For example, the topology that they have for the ears are completely different. They had to tweak a bit. They probably kept the same topology, but they had to tweak things for the claws. But you can really feel like it's a hoof with claws added on top. The wings are slightly different as well. And you can really feel like, I think part of it is just that they didn't have as much time to actually debug things, to actually make a proper dragon rig, besides Sparky, but Sparky is a character we see in a lot of more episodes. The dragons appear, 3 episodes? So they didn't have a lot of time, and it does explain why the dragons are not bipedal in that series. It does feel really weird too, because Spike doesn't even sound the same, so you feel like you got a knockoff of Spike. Like
Spike from Wish Time.
Spike, if you described it to someone and then that person had to make something out of it.
Also, thanks to legal reasons, they couldn't reuse anything from Discovery Family. And so, I guess in some ways they're doing this, perhaps, it's pure speculation, they're doing this just to avoid getting sued. Which is really hard when you have to make a sequel, but legally you can't use anything that came before.
That's ridiculous.
You're preaching to the choir.
This is just like the Megamind series, whatever the heck that was.
Oh, that one.
That- they screwed that up.
Syndicate?
What?
Oh wait, no, that's with Minion.
God, that was
But we can all agree that even with all these frustrations, it's still better than Philly Fantasia.
Yeah, as far as I can tell, I think Philip Fantasia had problems with investors. You can see a lot of logos in the beginning, and the trailer they had with a lot of the shots that they had were pulled at the basically just taking all the shots they could, make something presentable. There was one of the shots where one of the characters was showing a bow, and you could clearly tell that the bow didn't have a model ready. So they just dropped in a PNG with some glows. And then they compare with the shot that they had for the episode when they finally released it, and they actually had a 3D model that time. Lots of the tablet shots would be just matte paintings. There would be compositing errors all the time. There was one of the important scenes where one of the characters was running across a bridge during a musical number, which is usually supposed to be very, very important, and the sky behind was actually panning in the wrong direction. And
Is the door locked?
No.
Okay.
Well, they tell you to do a left face and you do a right face.
We're going to go just a little bit over time because we had a late start, and but we're going to speed things through as best we're able because now we're talking video games.
yeah, well, real-time entertainment, it barely qualifies as a video game. The gameplay loop is mostly just a fetch quest. So, what are the concessions that you have for a game? Yeah, it was released for Stadia. Stadia used to be a thing.
Very short thing.
So they both run on Unity. They both run for pretty much the same platforms. They have some limitations because they have next slide. Yeah, they have to basically make a single frame within 16.6 milliseconds, while for Make Your Mark and Sell Your Tale, they would have minutes to render the frame. Oh shoot, I forgot the caption from template. That's mostly too unrelated.
Okay, well, that's all you need.
And so run a Unity engine. They don't have level of detail. If you play a lot of modern games, you're gonna notice that some models just pop between quality levels when you get closer. But since the camera is set at a different angle for the game, you only need to use the same models for everything. You don't really have to worry about the elements of distance. 720p at 60 FPS. I think the Switch version runs at 30, but everything works. No screen space effects. The whole idea of screen space effects is that you take the frame buffer and you use, think of it like, for example, you run reflections. You take the image from the frame buffer, you do some crazy weird science on it, and you reproject it as a reflection in a model. But the problem is that it glitches a lot whenever you look at games where you have shiny floors. If you try to look at a shiny floor, you're going to notice a cutout because the image only reflects what's in the frame. So it just stops reflecting what's in the frame if it gets away. Mostly forward rendered. I won't talk about it, it's way too complex. Deferred rendering is basically weird science in terms of rendering. That's a lot, that saves a bunch of memory and avoids a lot of calculations. It's basically rendering once with no lighting, and then you fake the lighting by rendering the data directly on the frame buffer. There's some depth of field added as post-process. There's some bloom. So very, very simple game in terms of presentation. So what kind of concession do you get for something that's meant to be in real time? Mesh hair. So instead of adding individual strands for the hair, it's pretty much something that's shaped like the hair and textured like the hair. But you don't really get if you look at it, you don't really feel the hair as much. It doesn't look too bad, but you really feel like you lose something. There's other concessions like subdivisions. The idea of subdividing the model to get rid of the polygonated aspect is it's completely lost at the moment. You do it in real time because it's not made to just those subdivisions. And you would need to actually have a whole model just with more subdivisions if you get closer. You need to actually do it manually. Although there's some engines that actually automate the process. But it's not done by the game while you're playing it. It's done by the people making the game on their own side. Third compromise, dynamic shadow maps. You're gonna notice the shadows for all the characters are done by textures. And the whole approach that they have is to put the camera from the point of view of the light source. They cast they take the picture from the camera for the depth, basically a depth buffer, and then you compare the depth buffer with the position from the camera. And the whole idea with that is that if the position is different, it counts it as being included. But the problem is that since it's a camera, it doesn't actually have the softness that you'd have with shadows. For example, for example, if you have, actually, do I have anything that's not bright enough? No. Just trying to find a good example. Actually, look at the shadows or cast from those lights. You're going to notice that as they get further away from the light source, the shadow actually gets blurrier. But one of the problems that you get from that render is that the softness is constant for everything. So for example, the shadow that's cast on Sunny is as soft as the shadow from the building, even though the shadow comes from farther distance. It's mostly one of the limitations. The softness is actually generated by the resolution of the shadow. So in the Switch version, since the shadows are low resolution, they're actually looking softer. And since they're pixelated, they might have artifacts. For example, if you look at the legs, they don't properly connect with the shadows, just because there's resolution limit with it. For compromise, the animation priority. So not all the characters are going to have priority for the animation. So some of the cutscenes are going to be fully animated. Some of it is just going to be from template of characters talking or it cuts back and forth. And you're going to have some crowd characters that are not even going to stare at anything because their eyes are not even going to move, just because they didn't have the priority to actually animate them. It's not as consistent in terms of presentation, because they had to keep their priorities for the key moments.
Sorry.
So, how much time do we have?
Well, we're over time, so I'm sorry. I don't think we'll have time for
Let's speed run Tell Your Tale now.
Yes, because we're going back to the 2D world, and as noted earlier, Izzy's main is very much bigger on one side. But there's a lot that they have to do to create effect, and, well, it's not possible to match the 3D environment. They've got a lot of challenges, including new characters, new creatures, different animations. I'd argue that Cake Dragon is actually a better rendition of a dragon than the real dragons in the show. Different costumes, different lighting, different events. Hitch has somehow become an octopus.
Well, they finally got back smear frames.
But they have all kinds of frames, even on those rare occasions where Tell Your Tale summarized the events of Make Your Mark. Now, why not simply duplicate this shot for shot?
As far as I can tell, they probably did those in parallel, because the whole thing is done by two different studios from two completely different places. So as far as I could tell, they probably, with the deadline, they probably received some storyboards and started animating while the Make Your Mark team was working. They also had their own priorities, because Tell Your Tale doesn't have the same audience and the same platform expected. It was released for YouTube, and one of the key things with Tell Your Tale is board it's small. And the main reason is if you watch this on your phone from that distance, you want to be able to actually see what's going on. So they didn't really rely as much in terms of close-ups, also because the 2D rigs already have the subtle acting that you get from 3D. You don't really get the wide shots because on a tiny screen it crunch weird. So in terms of consistent presentation, you really feel like they had their own priorities that they had to keep. There was also the returns of smear frames because it actually works well with 2D.
What the?
Oh yeah, smear frames can look crazy, and the main idea is that they're meant to be only seen for 1 or 2 frames. They really complete the movement because very, very fast movements wouldn't resolve very well within 24 frames per second. And they also really help with the cartoonish aesthetic and the cartoonish appeal by really having crazy movements that are performed in crazy visual ways.
And most of all, they're trying not to be confused for an anime.
Oh my god.
I think this screenshot speaks for itself.
No comment needed.
You can also
Never
see
talk about
one of the limitations that they had compared with G4. All the characters have unique body types. The hoofs are different. The sizes. It's not just shrinking a rig. They actually had to reshape the whole thing. For example, if you compare the hooves on Izzy and Sunny, Sunny has very pointy one, while Izzy couldn't stomp anything. And the problem is that you can't reuse animation between the characters. You also have the mounts. People hate the beam mounts, but one of the advantages that they had compared to the other approaches is that the muzzle and the mount were separate, which make it a lot easier to animate if you had to make crazy expressions. Oh, actually, you can look at it was actually leaked before. So, and there was also 2 other options that they had that also look pretty good. There's also a couple of other limitations. Whenever they flip, they actually flip the main. So Izzy always has the main facing that one direction. Vital Scratch also had that. Yeah.
Well, while I am mostly used to how the characters look and tell your tale, it does stand out when the characters are facing away. I mean, unlike in Friendship is Magic, usually their tails are blocking their butts.
Yeah.
It extended it a little more, but it's like, I really hate that animators right now are just sticking with this chibi style.
Yeah.
I hate that because it's in Gumball, it's in Star Wars with the Forces of Evil, and it's an MLP, and everyone's using it, and I just think it just looks very childish and very lazy.
Yeah.
This had love in it.
I think part of it, I think one of the things with Friendship is Magic is the style. Lauren really pushed to get that style because she had her convictions. There's lots of projects where the style would be defined not by the creative team, but by the execs. Like you would look at it and think like, this does not look like our brand. And unfortunately, the artists don't really have any choice. They have to work with the style of the production that they're on. It's really sad because I want to see artists actually fulfill their creative visions, but also the beam mount is also a technical problem because it's cheaper to animate. It's also, I think people think that people would like it, so they keep going with that approach. So that's a bit why indie animation has much different styles, much more appeal, just because it's artists that actually have the control over everything. So they go with what they like and what they think people would like from their own artistic point of view.
We need to keep moving forward. I wish we could have more time for discussion. We'll both be around the convention if you want to talk further. I do want to just say one thing. I hope one of the big takeaways from this panel is that time, resources, and budget are a heavy influence on a production. And while it's tempting to say that, call it lazy, in truth, we don't know what the creative staff is facing when they have to create a new show. So rather than saying it's lazy, there may be a lot of reasons why they had to tone down passion for economy. And that is truly frustrating. If you say the history of Animaniacs, part of the reason it was so successful is that the studio just didn't care. In fact, when they keep their hands out, that's when artists get to really drive their passion. But G5 is a part of the tapestry of My Little Pony. I don't know how it will help shape things moving forward, but we learn a lot about what went right, what went wrong, and we get to pass that forward to people who may one day work on My Little Pony in the future. So thank you all for coming to our panel. Hope you've enjoyed, and we'll see you for the rest of HarmonyCon 2025.